Picture this. You've just met someone who seems absolutely perfect. He's charming, attentive, and says all the right things. He tells you you're unlike anyone he's ever met. He seems genuinely interested in your life, your stories, your dreams. Everything feels magical, almost too good to be true. And here's the thing, it probably is. Because what you're experiencing right now in these early moments might not be the beginning of something beautiful. It might be the carefully constructed opening act of something far more dangerous. And by the time you realize what's happening, you might already be emotionally invested, making it exponentially harder to walk away. Today, we're going to talk about the subtle signs, the quiet warnings, the barely visible red flags that show up early in a relationship. The ones most women miss. The ones that seem harmless or even flattering at first. But these signs, they're not harmless. They're previews of what's coming. They're the trailer for a movie you definitely don't want to star in. And as a woman with life experience, with wisdom, with a history that's taught you valuable lessons, you deserve to know exactly what to look for. Because recognizing these patterns early doesn't make you cynical or jaded. It makes you smart. It makes you self-protective. It makes you someone who values herself enough to walk away before the damage begins. Welcome back to The Heart Code, where we explore the deeper truths about human behavior, relationships, and the psychology that drives the people around us. If this is your first time here, you've found a space dedicated to protecting your emotional well-being, understanding manipulation tactics, and empowering you with knowledge that can literally change the trajectory of your life. We don't sugarcoat reality here. We don't pretend that love conquers all or that good intentions are enough. We look at what actually happens in relationships, backed by psychology, supported by research, and validated by the real experiences of real women. Before we dive deep into today's topic, I want to ask you for something. If you find value in this content, if these insights resonate with you, if you've ever had that moment where something I said made everything click into place, please take a moment to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that this content matters, that these conversations are important, that women deserve access to this kind of protective knowledge. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or even just letting me know you're here. Your engagement creates a community of aware, empowered women who support each other. Share this video with the women in your life who need to hear this message, especially those who might be entering new relationships or those who've been hurt before and deserve better this time around. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we're building something here. We're building a movement of women who refuse to ignore red flags, who trust their instincts, who prioritize their peace over potential. Every week, we explore the psychology behind relationships, the tactics manipulators use, and the strategies you can employ to protect yourself. This isn't just content, it's armor. And if you want to support this channel in going even deeper, creating even more comprehensive content, and reaching even more women who need these messages, consider supporting us with a super thanks. It directly helps us continue this important work, and it lets me know that what we're doing here matters to you. Now, let's talk about something crucial. Let's talk about the early warning signs that most women, especially those of us who've been through relationships before, tend to rationalize away. Let's talk about the behaviors that seem small, insignificant, maybe even charming in the moment, but are actually massive red flags waving frantically, trying to warn you of what's ahead. Because here's what you need to understand. Men who are going to become problems don't usually show up wearing a sign that says danger. They show up looking like opportunity. They show up seeming like exactly what you've been looking for. And that's precisely what makes them so effective, so dangerous, and so important to identify early. Let's start with something that might surprise you. Let's start with a behavior that many women actually find romantic, flattering, even exciting. Intense early interest, overwhelming attention, what feels like being swept off your feet. He texts you constantly. He wants to see you every day. He talks about your future together after knowing you for 2 weeks. He tells you he's never felt this way before. He says you're his soulmate, his perfect match, the one he's been waiting for his entire life. And you think, finally, someone who recognizes my value. Finally, someone who isn't playing games. Finally, someone who knows what he wants and isn't afraid to show it. But here's what's really happening. This isn't love. This isn't even infatuation in the healthy sense. This is love bombing. And love bombing is one of the most dangerous manipulation tactics that exists, specifically because it feels so good. It feels like everything you've ever wanted. It feels like validation, appreciation, and passion all rolled into one intoxicating package. But what it actually is, it's a strategic assault designed to overwhelm your judgment, bypass your natural caution, and create an artificial bond before you have time to see who this person really is. Think about it logically. How can someone claim to love you deeply after 2 weeks? How can they know you're their soulmate when they barely know your middle name? How can they be certain about forever when they haven't seen you handle stress, disagreement, or disappointment? They can't. What they can do is project an idealized fantasy onto you, treat you like you're that fantasy, and wait for you to become so emotionally invested in maintaining that feeling that you'll overlook all the warning signs that follow. Because here's the pattern. The love bombing phase doesn't last. It can't last. It's not sustainable. And once you're hooked, once you're emotionally dependent on that flood of attention and affirmation, that's when the real person emerges. That's when the control starts. That's when you discover that all that intense early attention wasn't about loving you. It was about capturing you. So what does healthy early interest look like? It's consistent but measured. It's genuinely curious about who you are without making grand declarations about your cosmic connection. It respects your pace, your boundaries, and your need for time to assess the situation. It understands that real connection builds gradually, that trust develops through repeated positive interactions, and that sustainable relationships aren't built on intensity. They're built on compatibility, respect, and genuine care that grows over time. If someone is rushing you, pushing for rapid escalation, or making you feel like you need to match their intensity or risk losing them, that's not romance, that's pressure. And pressure early on is never a good sign. Now, let's talk about another early warning sign that's incredibly common but often missed. Inconsistency between his words and his actions. He says all the right things. He tells you how much you mean to him, how special you are, how lucky he is to have found you. He talks about his values, his integrity, his respect for women. He presents himself as emotionally available, ready for commitment, and genuinely interested in building something real. But when you look at his actual behavior, it doesn't match. He cancels plans last minute. He's available when it's convenient for him, but unavailable when you need support. He makes promises he doesn't keep. He says he'll call and doesn't. He talks about taking you somewhere special, but never actually makes the plans. He discusses future possibilities, but takes no concrete steps toward making them reality. This inconsistency isn't an accident. It's not because he's busy or forgetful or still figuring things out. It's a preview of exactly who he is and how he operates. Because here's a fundamental truth about human behavior. When someone's words consistently don't match their actions, believe the actions. Every time, without exception. Words are easy. Words cost nothing. Words can be tailored to tell you exactly what you want to hear. But actions reveal truth. Actions show priorities. Actions demonstrate what someone actually values versus what they claim to value. And when there's a gap between the two, That gap is filled with either self-deception or deliberate manipulation. For women with life experience, this is particularly important to recognize because we've often been conditioned to give people the benefit of the doubt, to make excuses for disappointing behavior, to focus on potential rather than reality. We tell ourselves, he's going through a tough time. He's not good at expressing himself through actions. He shows love differently than we do. He'll be more consistent once things settle down. But the truth is, if a man is genuinely interested in you, if he genuinely values you, if he genuinely wants to build something with you, his actions will reflect that from the beginning. He won't need to be reminded to follow through. He won't need to be convinced to prioritize you. He won't need you to lower your standards to accommodate his inconsistency. He'll simply show up consistently because that's what people do when something actually matters to them. So pay attention in those early interactions. Does he do what he says he's going to do? Does he follow through on commitments, even small ones? Does his behavior match his proclaimed values and intentions? If not, that's not a rough patch or a communication issue or something that will improve with time. That's who he is. That's what being with him will feel like. And you get to decide right now in these early stages whether that's acceptable to you. Because I promise you, if you accept inconsistency now, you'll get more of it later. If you tolerate a disconnect between words and actions now, it will become the foundation of your entire relationship, and you deserve so much better than that. Let's move to another critical early warning sign: the way he talks about his past relationships, particularly his ex-partners. This is one of the most revealing indicators you'll encounter, and it deserves your careful attention. When the topic of past relationships comes up, how does he discuss them? Does he take any responsibility for what went wrong? Does he acknowledge his own role in conflicts or failures? Does he speak about his ex-partners with basic human respect, even if those relationships ended badly? Or does he paint himself as a perpetual victim? Does every ex become characterized as crazy, unreasonable, manipulative, or emotionally unstable? Does he have a story where he was completely blameless and they were entirely at fault? If every woman in his past is painted as the villain in his story, you're not hearing the truth. You're hearing a massive red flag. Because here's what's really happening. Either he genuinely cannot see his own contribution to relationship problems, which indicates a profound lack of self-awareness and accountability, or he can see it but chooses to rewrite history to maintain his self-image as the good guy who keeps getting wronged by terrible women. Either scenario is problematic. Either scenario predicts exactly how he'll talk about you once this relationship ends, because the man who calls all his exes crazy isn't unlucky. He's the common denominator. He's the one creating situations where women react emotionally, then using those reactions as evidence of their instability rather than examining why they reacted that way. Emotionally mature people who are genuinely ready for healthy relationships, can discuss their past with nuance. They can say, this relationship didn't work out for these reasons, and here's what I learned about myself in the process. They can acknowledge that they weren't always their best selves, that they made mistakes, that they contributed to problems even if they weren't entirely at fault. They can recognize that past partners were human beings with their own perspectives and pain points, and that relationships are complex dynamics where both people play a role in outcomes. They don't need to villainize someone to explain why it didn't work. They can simply say, we weren't compatible. We wanted different things. We brought out qualities in each other that weren't productive, and I've grown from that experience. But the man who cannot do this, the man who needs his ex to be the bad guy so he can be the good guy, that man hasn't learned anything. That man hasn't grown. That man is going to repeat the exact same patterns with you, and when it inevitably goes wrong, you'll become the next crazy ex in his narrative. You'll become the next woman he describes to someone else as unreasonable, emotional, or unstable. And the saddest part? The women who come after you will hear about you the same way you're hearing about his exes now. They'll be warned about you the way you should be warned about him. Because people who don't take responsibility don't change. They just find new people to blame. So listen carefully when he talks about his past. Listen to his language. Listen to his level of accountability. Listen to whether he speaks about former partners as complex human beings or caricatured villains. And if you hear nothing but blame, nothing but victimhood, nothing but stories where he's perpetually wronged and women are perpetually unreasonable, understand that you're getting a preview of your future. You're hearing how he'll describe you someday, and you get to choose whether to sign up for that or walk away now, while it's still early, while you're not yet emotionally invested, while you can still exit without explaining yourself to someone who wouldn't understand anyway. Another crucial early warning sign involves boundaries, specifically how he responds when you set them. This is perhaps one of the most predictive behaviors you'll encounter in early dating, because boundaries are where respect either shows up or reveals its absence. So let's say you've established a boundary. Maybe you tell him you need certain evenings to yourself. Maybe you explain that you're not comfortable with certain types of communication or behavior. Maybe you ask him to slow down because the pace feels too fast. Maybe you request that he not show up unannounced or that he give you advance notice before making plans. These are all reasonable boundaries. These are all healthy requests that any emotionally mature person should be able to respect. But here's where the test comes in. How does he respond? Does he hear your boundary and honor it? Does he thank you for being clear about your needs? Does he adjust his behavior accordingly and show you through consistent action that he respects your limits? Or does he push back? Does he question why you need that boundary? Does he make you feel like you're being unreasonable, difficult, or asking for too much? Does he agree in the moment but then slowly erode that boundary over time, testing to see if you'll enforce it? Does he act hurt or offended that you have needs separate from his desires? Does he make you feel guilty for having requirements? A man who respects you will respect your boundaries, period. He won't need to understand every detail of why you need something. He won't require justification for your comfort levels. He won't treat your boundaries as obstacles to overcome or negotiations to win. He'll simply hear what you need, adjust his behavior accordingly, and demonstrate through action that your emotional safety and comfort matter more than his convenience or preferences. Because that's what respect looks like in practice. That's what healthy relationships are built on. And if that respect isn't present from the beginning, it won't magically appear later. But the man who pushes against your boundaries, the man who makes you defend your needs, the man who treats your limits as challenges rather than information, that man is showing you exactly what being in a relationship with him will feel like. It will feel like constantly having to justify your needs. It will feel like your comfort is less important than his wants. It will feel like you're being difficult every time you ask for basic respect. And over time, if you stay with someone like this, you'll find yourself abandoning your boundaries just to keep the peace. You'll find yourself accepting treatment you never thought you'd tolerate. You'll find yourself so far from your own standards that you barely recognize yourself. And all because you ignored this early warning sign, this clear indication that he doesn't actually respect your autonomy, your needs, or your right to define the terms of your own participation in the relationship. So test this early. Set a boundary. Nothing extreme or unreasonable, just something simple that reflects a genuine need. And watch what happens. Watch carefully, because his response will tell you everything you need to know about whether this person is safe for your heart, your peace, and your future. If he respects it immediately and consistently, that's a green flag. That's someone worth getting to know better. But if he pushes, questions, undermines, or makes you feel bad for having needs, walk away. Run, actually, because that behavior only escalates. It never improves. Let's discuss another early pattern that's particularly insidious: the way he isolates you from your support system while making it feel natural, even romantic. This doesn't usually happen dramatically. He doesn't typically say you can't see your friends or talk to your family. That would be too obvious. Instead, it's subtle, it's gradual, it's wrapped in what appears to be devotion. He wants to spend all his time with you. He gets disappointed when you make plans with friends. He makes subtle comments about your best friend being negative or not really having your best interests at heart. He questions why you need to talk to your sister so often. He schedules things during times he knows you usually see your support network, then acts hurt if you choose them over him. He creates situations where it's just easier to cancel on other people than to deal with his reaction. And here's where it gets really tricky. This often doesn't feel like isolation at first. It feels like someone who can't get enough of you. It feels like being prioritized. It feels like he's choosing you above everything else and wants you to do the same. And if you have friends or family members who are genuinely problematic, his concerns might even seem valid. He might point out real issues about certain relationships in your life. But here's the critical distinction. A healthy partner might express concerns about genuinely harmful relationships, but they do so while encouraging you to maintain your healthy connections. They support your friendships with good people. They encourage your family relationships. They understand that your support network makes you stronger, happier, and more resilient, and they're glad you have those people in your life. But a controlling partner wants you increasingly dependent on him for all emotional support, social interaction, and validation. He wants to be your entire world. He wants you isolated from people who might notice concerning behavior or encourage you to prioritize yourself. Because isolation is a critical component of control. When you're isolated, you have fewer reality checks. When you're isolated, you have fewer people noticing changes in you. When you're isolated, you have fewer resources to draw on when things get difficult. When you're isolated, leaving becomes exponentially harder because you've lost the support network that would help you do so. So pay attention in those early stages. Does he support your outside relationships? Is he happy when you come back from time with friends feeling recharged and joyful? Does he encourage you to maintain your connections even when it means less time with him? Or does he subtly undermine those relationships? Does he create conflict around them? Does he make you feel guilty for wanting to maintain your own social life? Does time with him increasingly mean time away from everyone else? Because if the answer is the latter, you're not seeing romance. You're seeing the early stages of isolation. And once you're isolated, once your world has shrunk to just him, that's when the real problems begin. That's when leaving becomes much harder. That's when you'll wish you'd noticed this pattern early and walked away while you still had your full support network intact, while you still had people around you who could help you see clearly and support your choices. Now let's examine a particularly telling early behavior, his relationship with truth. I'm not just talking about obvious lies, though those are certainly red flags. I'm talking about the smaller, more subtle dishonesty that shows up early. The exaggerations, the omissions, the reframing of facts to make himself look better, the stories that don't quite add up when you hear them told differently at different times, the casual dishonesty that he doesn't even seem to register as problematic. Because here's the thing about integrity, it's not situational. People with genuine integrity don't have one standard for big things and another for small things. They don't pick and choose when truth matters. They're consistent because honesty is simply how they operate in the world. But some people view truth as flexible. They view it as something to be managed, manipulated, or modified based on what serves them in the moment. And this shows up early if you're paying attention. He might exaggerate his accomplishments, making them sound more impressive than they actually were. He might omit key details about his past, his current situation, or his commitments. He might tell different versions of the same story depending on what image he's trying to project. He might make promises he has no intention of keeping, viewing them as things he said rather than commitments he made. He might lie about small, seemingly insignificant things, which is actually one of the biggest red flags that exists. Because if someone will lie about things that don't matter, they'll absolutely lie about things that do. Think about what this means for a relationship. If someone is dishonest about small things, about things where the truth wouldn't even cause a problem, what happens when they face a situation where lying serves their interests? What happens when honesty would be uncomfortable, inconvenient, or consequential? If they're willing to lie when there's nothing at stake, they're definitely willing to lie when something important is on the line. And once you're in a relationship with someone who has a casual relationship with truth, you'll spend your entire time together wondering what's real. You'll question everything. You'll lose trust not just in them, but in your own perception, because you'll never be quite sure whether what you're being told bears any resemblance to reality. So watch for this carefully. Does his story stay consistent? Do facts match up over time? When you catch him in a small lie or exaggeration, does he own it and apologize? Or does he deflect, minimize, or make excuses? Does he have integrity even when integrity is inconvenient? Does he keep his word on small things, demonstrating that commitments matter to him? Because if the answer is no, if you're seeing flexibility with truth, inconsistency in details, or casual dishonesty about things that don't seem to matter much, understand that you're seeing a preview. You're seeing how he operates. And in a long-term relationship, you need to be able to trust your partner's word. You need to be able to take what they say at face value. You need to know that commitments mean something. And if that foundation isn't there from the beginning, it will never develop. Dishonest people don't become honest. They just get better at lying. Here's another early pattern that reveals character. How he treats service workers, waitstaff, customer service representatives, people he perceives as having less power or status than he does. This is one of the most reliable character tests that exists, because here's the truth: how someone treats people who can't do anything for them reveals who they really are. When he's with you, he has incentive to be charming. He's trying to impress you. He's on his best behavior. But when he's interacting with someone he'll never see again, someone he has no need to impress, someone he views as beneath him in status or power, that's when the mask slips. That's when you see the real person. So pay attention when you're out together. Is he respectful to servers? Does he say please and thank you? Does he treat them like human beings worthy of basic courtesy? Or is he dismissive, rude, or demanding? Does he snap his fingers, talk down to people, or act like their job is to cater to his every whim? Does he become aggressive when something doesn't meet his expectations? Does he tip poorly after receiving good service? Does he treat customer service calls like opportunities to berate someone? Because if he does any of these things, understand what you're seeing. You're seeing how he treats people when he feels he has power over them. You're seeing what happens when his wants aren't immediately satisfied. You're seeing how he responds to minor inconveniences or imperfect service. And here's why this matters so much. Right now, you have power in this dynamic. You're the one he's pursuing. You're the one whose approval he wants. You're the one who can accept or reject him. But what happens once he feels secure in the relationship? What happens when the pursuit is over and the power dynamic shifts? What happens when you disappoint him, when you don't meet an expectation, when you make a mistake? If he treats service workers poorly, that's how he'll eventually treat you. If he's rude to people he perceives as having less power, that rudeness will eventually be directed at you once he feels he has the upper hand. If he lacks basic respect for people in service positions, he lacks basic respect, period. He's simply strategic enough to hide it when it serves his interests. Conversely, a good man, a man of genuine character, treats everyone with basic human dignity. He's kind to waiters. He's patient with customer service representatives. He tips fairly. He says thank you to people who help him. He treats service work as legitimate work and service workers as people worthy of respect. Not because he's trying to impress you, though you certainly should be impressed, but because that's simply who he is. That's how he moves through the world. And that kindness, that baseline respect for human beings, regardless of their role or status, that's what will sustain a relationship long term. That's what will protect you when you're vulnerable, when you make mistakes, when you're not at your best, because you'll know that his respect for you isn't conditional on your performance or your ability to meet his needs perfectly. You'll know it's grounded in a fundamental belief that people deserve to be treated well. So watch this carefully on those early dates. Observe how he treats people who aren't you. Notice whether his kindness extends beyond people he's trying to impress. And if you see contempt, rudeness, or disrespect directed at service workers, understand that you're getting crucial information. You're seeing who he becomes when he feels entitled, when he has power, when someone isn't meeting his expectations perfectly, and that person will eventually show up in your relationship. Count on it. Let's talk about another early warning sign that's particularly relevant for women with life experience. How he responds to your independence, your competence, your success. As a woman who's built a life, who has accomplishments, who has established yourself in the world, you bring substance to a relationship. You bring financial stability, emotional maturity, life skills, and probably a level of success in your career or personal endeavors. And a secure man, a confident man, a man who's comfortable in his own skin, will celebrate these things about you. He'll be genuinely happy that you're capable, successful, and independent. He'll view your strength as an asset rather than a threat. He'll be proud of your accomplishments. He'll support your ambitions. He'll encourage your growth. But an insecure man, a threatened man, a man whose sense of self is fragile and requires you to be smaller so he can feel bigger, will have a very different response. And this shows up early if you're watching for it. He might seem impressed by your accomplishments initially, but that impression is often mixed with subtle undermining. He makes jokes about your success that have an edge to them. He changes the subject when you talk about professional victories. He brings up his own achievements in ways that diminish yours. He offers unsolicited advice about how you could do things better, even in areas where you're clearly more knowledgeable or experienced than he is. He questions your decisions. He suggests you're working too hard or taking things too seriously. He makes you feel like your independence is a flaw rather than a strength. This is particularly insidious because it often doesn't feel like criticism at first. It feels like concern. It feels like care. He's worried about you. He thinks you're stressed. He wants you to relax more, to prioritize relationship over career, to lean on him. And if these suggestions were coming from a place of genuine care, if they were balanced with respect for your choices and support for your goals, they might be fine. But they're not. They're coming from a place of threat. They're coming from a man who needs you to be less so he can feel like more. They're coming from someone whose masculinity is so fragile that it can't coexist with your strength. And here's what happens if you stay with someone like this. You'll find yourself slowly diminishing. You'll start downplaying your achievements. You'll stop talking about things that excite you professionally because you know it won't be received well. You'll begin to defer to him even in areas where you're the expert. You'll start making yourself smaller, quieter, less visible, because it becomes exhausting to constantly defend your right to be capable, to be successful, to take up space in your own life. And over time, you'll lose pieces of yourself. You'll lose your confidence. You'll lose your sense of your own competence. You'll start to wonder if maybe he's right. Maybe you are too intense, too ambitious, too focused on the wrong things. And that's exactly what he wants. He wants you uncertain, diminished, looking to him for validation, because that's the only way he can feel secure. So notice this early, share something you're proud of, and watch his reaction. Talk about your career goals and observe his response. Be yourself, fully yourself, in all your capable, accomplished glory, and see what happens. Does he celebrate you? Does he ask interested questions and genuinely engage with what matters to you? Does he support your ambitions and encourage your growth? Or does he subtly undermine, minimize, or redirect? Does he seem uncomfortable with your strength? Does he need to assert his own competence by diminishing yours? Because if you're seeing the latter, you're not seeing a secure partner. You're seeing someone who needs you to be less so he can feel adequate. And you deserve so much better than that. You deserve someone who loves you at full power, who celebrates your capabilities, who feels lucky to be with someone so accomplished and competent. Don't settle for someone who needs you diminished. Another critical early warning sign involves emotional regulation, specifically how he handles frustration, disappointment, or anger. Everyone experiences negative emotions. That's part of being human, but there's a massive difference between experiencing negative emotions and how someone manages and expresses those emotions. And you can see this pattern very early, often in situations that seem minor. Maybe something goes wrong on a date. Maybe he gets stuck in traffic. Maybe a restaurant messes up his order. Maybe technology doesn't work the way he wants. Maybe you're not available when he wants to see you. These small frustrations reveal everything you need to know about emotional regulation. Does he handle minor setbacks with relative equanimity? Can he laugh at things going wrong? Can he adjust plans without drama? Can he express disappointment without making it your responsibility to fix his feelings? Or does he overreact? Does he become disproportionately angry about small things? Does he rage at other drivers, berate service staff, or slam things around when frustrated? Does he give you the silent treatment when disappointed? Does he make his emotional state your responsibility, expecting you to manage his feelings for him? Does he become verbally aggressive, even if that aggression isn't yet directed at you? Poor emotional regulation is one of the most predictive factors for relationship violence, emotional abuse, and toxic dynamics. Because someone who can't handle small frustrations certainly can't handle big ones. Someone who rages over traffic isn't going to calmly discuss relationship conflicts. Someone who punishes you emotionally when disappointed is going to use those tactics throughout your relationship. Someone who can't self-soothe, who expects others to manage their emotional states, who becomes aggressive when things don't go their way, is fundamentally unsafe to be in a relationship with. Because relationships involve frustration, they involve disappointment, they involve things not going perfectly. And if someone's response to minor imperfections is rage, aggression, or emotional punishment, what happens when something actually serious goes wrong? Moreover, poor emotional regulation often escalates. The anger that starts directed at other drivers or service staff eventually gets directed at you. The emotional instability that seems like passion early on becomes volatility that keeps you walking on eggshells. The intensity that felt exciting becomes unpredictability that erodes your sense of safety, because when someone can't regulate their own emotions, you end up doing it for them. You end up managing your behavior to minimize their negative reactions. You end up responsible for their emotional state, and that's exhausting, it's unfair, and it's ultimately impossible. You can't control someone else's emotions. You can't prevent them from being disappointed or frustrated. And in healthy relationships, you shouldn't have to try. So watch how he handles setbacks early on. Notice his frustration tolerance. Observe whether he can experience negative emotions without making them everyone else's problem. Pay attention to whether he takes responsibility for his own emotional state or expects you to manage it for him. And if you see poor emotional regulation, if you see disproportionate reactions to minor frustrations, if you see aggression, volatility, or emotional instability, walk away, because that will only get worse under the stress and intimacy of a real relationship. That will only become more frightening once you're more invested. That will only be harder to leave once you've been systematically worn down by the constant effort of managing someone else's emotional state while neglecting your own. Let's examine another early pattern that's particularly important for women who've been in relationships before: how he relates to the concept of compromise. Healthy relationships require compromise. They require both people to sometimes adjust their preferences, meet in the middle, and prioritize the relationship over individual wants. But here's the critical thing: compromise should be mutual. It should be reciprocal. It should involve both people giving sometimes and both people being considered in decisions. It should never be one person consistently sacrificing while the other consistently gets their way. So watch how this plays out early, even in small decisions. Where to eat dinner, what movie to watch, how to spend an evening together. These small moments reveal patterns. Does he genuinely consider your preferences? Does he ask what you want and factor that into decisions? Is he willing to do things your way sometimes, even when it's not his first choice? Or is every decision somehow subtly steered toward what he wants? Does he present his preferences as the logical or obvious choice? Does he frame your preferences as unreasonable or less valid? Does compromise always seem to mean you adjusting to him rather than mutual give and take? Some men are incredibly skilled at making their preferences seem like the only reasonable option. They'll say things like, "I thought you'd want to," or "I assumed you'd prefer," or "I just figured we'd," presenting their desires as shared decisions, even though you were never consulted. They'll make your preferences seem difficult or complicated, while their preferences are framed as simple and straightforward. They'll agree to compromise, but then subtly sabotage plans that aren't what they wanted, ensuring that next time you'll just go with their preference from the start because it's easier. They'll act put out or disappointed when things go your way, making you feel guilty for having needs that differ from theirs. This matters because compromise patterns set the template for your entire relationship. If he won't genuinely compromise over small things, when he's supposedly on his best behavior, trying to impress you, actively pursuing you, what happens later? If you're already finding that your preferences consistently lose out to his, what happens when you face bigger decisions? What happens when you need to compromise about where to live, how to spend money, how to handle family relationships, major life choices? If the pattern from the beginning is that his needs matter more than yours, that his comfort is prioritized over yours, that compromise means you adjusting rather than mutual give and take, that pattern will only calcify over time. Healthy compromise feels collaborative. It feels like you're building something together where both people's needs matter and both people are invested in the other's happiness. It feels fair, it feels balanced, it feels like you're on the same team. But unhealthy compromise feels like losing. It feels like your needs are an inconvenience. It feels like you're always the one adapting, adjusting, setting aside what you want. And if that's the feeling you're getting early on, if you're noticing that compromise is one-directional, trust that feeling, because it's not going to improve. People who don't genuinely value your needs and preferences in the beginning certainly won't value them later. People who expect you to consistently defer won't suddenly develop reciprocity. And you deserve a partner who views your happiness as equally important to his own, who genuinely wants you to feel considered and valued, who understands that compromise is something both people do, not something one person demands from the other. Now let's discuss a particularly subtle but revealing early pattern: financial behavior and attitudes about money. This might seem premature to evaluate early in dating, but how someone relates to money reveals character, values, and patterns that will absolutely impact your relationship if it continues. I'm not talking about how much money he has. I'm talking about how he handles whatever money he does have, and his attitudes about financial responsibility, fairness, and transparency. Watch how he approaches paying for dates. I'm not suggesting he needs to pay for everything or that you should expect to be financially supported, but observe the pattern. Is there reciprocity? Is there consideration? Or is there a clear expectation that you'll cover things without acknowledgement or appreciation? Does he order the most expensive items and then suggest splitting the check? Does he consistently forget his wallet? Does he make a big show of paying once and then subtly expect you to cover things for weeks afterward? Does he borrow money without clear plans to repay? Does he seem uncomfortable with you being financially independent? Conversely, does he flash money around in ways that seem designed to impress rather than natural generosity? Also, watch how he talks about money. Does he take financial responsibility seriously? Does he have basic financial stability, or is he constantly in crisis mode? And I'm not talking about being wealthy. I'm talking about whether he handles his financial obligations, whether he lives within his means, whether he plans ahead rather than lurching from crisis to crisis. Because financial chaos creates relationship chaos. Someone who can't manage their own finances will eventually look to you to solve those problems. Someone who doesn't take financial responsibility seriously won't suddenly develop it in a relationship. Someone whose relationship with money is characterized by impulsivity, poor boundaries, or entitlement will bring all of that into your shared life if the relationship continues. For women who have established financial stability, who've built assets, who manage money responsibly, this is particularly important. You need to protect what you've built. You need to be aware that financial irresponsibility, financial manipulation, or financial entitlement can put everything you've worked for at risk. And those patterns show up early. They show up in how he talks about money, how he handles date expenses, whether he lives within his means, whether he respects financial boundaries, whether he views your resources as something he's entitled to access. So pay attention to these patterns. Notice whether there's reciprocity and consideration around money. Notice whether he handles his own financial obligations responsibly. Notice whether he seems to view your financial independence as attractive or as a resource he can tap into. Notice whether money becomes a point of manipulation, with him using his spending or withholding as a way to control situations. Because financial issues are one of the leading causes of relationship conflict and breakdown. And if you're seeing red flags around money early, if you're noticing patterns that concern you, those patterns will only become more pronounced and more problematic if you move forward. Better to see them clearly now and make informed decisions than to ignore them and face serious consequences later. Let's examine another crucial early indicator: how he responds to your success, your joy, your good news. When something wonderful happens in your life, when you get a promotion, when you accomplish something you're proud of, when you're excited about an opportunity, when you're happy about something, how does he respond? A secure partner, someone who genuinely cares about your well-being, will be genuinely happy for you. Your joy will create joy in him. Your success will make him proud. Your excitement will be met with enthusiasm and celebration. He'll ask questions because he's interested. He'll want to hear details because he cares. He'll celebrate with you because your happiness matters to him. But an insecure partner, someone who views your life as competition rather than collaboration, will have a very different response. And you can see this early. You share good news and he changes the subject. You're excited about something and he dampens your enthusiasm with practical concerns or pessimistic possibilities. You achieve something significant and he immediately brings up his own achievements in a way that feels comparative rather than connective. You're happy and he seems annoyed by your happiness rather than elevated by it. He finds ways to diminish your joy, to point out flaws in your success, to refocus attention on himself, or to simply not engage with what matters to you. This inability to celebrate your wins, to feel genuinely happy about your happiness, to be excited about your excitement, this is a massive red flag, because it reveals someone who can't handle you thriving. It reveals someone whose sense of self is so fragile that your success feels like his failure. It reveals someone who needs you at a certain level, not too successful, not too happy, not too independent, so that he can feel adequate in comparison. And that's a terrible foundation for a relationship. That's a foundation that requires you to stay small. That's a foundation that punishes you for growing, for achieving, for experiencing joy. Imagine building a life with someone like this. Every success you experience becomes a source of tension rather than celebration. Every joy you feel has to be muted because it makes him uncomfortable. Every achievement has to be downplayed because he can't handle you shining. You start to hide your good news. You start to minimize your accomplishments. You start to feel guilty for being happy because his inability to celebrate you trains you to make yourself smaller. And over time, you lose access to joy. You lose the ability to fully experience positive emotions because they've become associated with his negative response. You become smaller, dimmer, less yourself, all to maintain his comfort. So notice this early. Share something that makes you happy and watch his response. Tell him about something you're proud of and observe his reaction. Be fully yourself in your joy and your excitement and see what happens. Does he match your energy? Does he amplify your happiness? Does he ask follow-up questions because he's genuinely interested and invested in your well-being? Or does he deflate you? Does he redirect? Does he seem bothered by your happiness? Because if it's the latter, you need to understand that this person is not safe for your joy. This person cannot handle you thriving. This person needs you diminished. And you deserve someone who celebrates you at full volume, who takes genuine pleasure in your happiness, who wants you to shine as brightly as possible. Don't settle for someone who needs you dimmed. Here's another early warning sign that's particularly important: how he handles disagreement or differing opinions. In the early stages of dating, most people are on their best behavior. They're agreeable, they're flexible, they're focused on commonalities rather than differences. But at some point, disagreement emerges. Maybe it's something small, a different opinion about a movie or a current event. Maybe it's something more significant, a differing value or perspective on an important topic. These moments of disagreement reveal everything about whether someone is safe to be in conflict with, which is critical because every relationship involves conflict. So when disagreement occurs, what happens? Can he engage with a different perspective respectfully? Can he disagree without becoming disagreeable? Can he maintain his position while still respecting yours? Can he have a conversation where both people have valid but different viewpoints? Or does disagreement trigger something in him? Does he become dismissive, condescending, or aggressive? Does he need to win rather than understand? Does he belittle your perspective or make you feel stupid for having a different opinion? Does he use tactics like raising his voice, talking over you, or overwhelming you with arguments until you give up? Does he withdraw affection or give you the silent treatment when you don't agree with him? The inability to handle disagreement respectfully is one of the clearest predictors of relationship dysfunction. Because disagreement is inevitable. You won't agree about everything, You'll have different perspectives, different priorities, different ways of seeing situations. And if someone can't handle that, if disagreement feels like a threat rather than an opportunity to understand each other better, you're looking at someone who needs control rather than connection. You're looking at someone whose ego is too fragile to allow space for your independent thoughts. You're looking at someone who will make every disagreement a battle rather than a conversation. Moreover, watch for intellectual dishonesty in disagreements. Does he argue in good faith, actually engaging with what you're saying? Or does he use tactics like straw manning, where he misrepresents your position to make it easier to argue against? Does he move goalposts, changing what you're arguing about when his initial position is challenged? Does he use personal attacks rather than engaging with the substance of your points? Does he claim you're being emotional or irrational when you're making perfectly valid arguments he simply disagrees with? These are manipulation tactics. These are not the behaviors of someone who respects you as an intellectual equal. Healthy disagreement feels collaborative even when you're on opposite sides. It feels like both people are trying to understand and communicate rather than trying to win. It feels respectful. It feels safe to express your true thoughts. It feels like your perspective is valued even when it's not shared. But unhealthy disagreement feels combative. It feels like you're being punished for having independent thoughts. It feels like you need to either convince him or acquiesce, with no middle ground that respects both perspectives. It feels unsafe to disagree, which means over time you'll stop doing it. You'll start just agreeing with him to avoid the conflict. And when that happens, you've lost your voice in the relationship. You've become an echo rather than a full person. So don't be afraid to disagree early. Express opinions that differ from his. Engage in conversations about topics where you have different perspectives. And watch carefully what happens. Does he treat you with respect? Does he engage thoughtfully? Can he disagree without being disagreeable? Or does he become someone you don't want to be in conflict with? Because if it's the latter, if disagreement brings out problematic behavior, you're not safe in this relationship. You're not going to be able to be yourself. You're going to spend your life either acquiescing or fighting. Neither option is acceptable. Neither option is healthy, and you deserve better. Let's talk about another early pattern that reveals a great deal about character and intentions, how he describes what he's looking for in a relationship. Most people in early dating will discuss what they want, what they're hoping to find, what matters to them in a partner. Listen very carefully to this, not just to what he says, but to what he emphasizes. Does he talk about genuine connection, mutual respect, partnership, shared growth? Does he emphasize qualities that reflect character, compatibility, and emotional depth? Or does he emphasize how he wants to feel, what he wants to get, what serves his needs without reciprocal consideration of what he offers? Some men will describe what they want in a partner in ways that are entirely about their own benefit. They want someone who makes them feel good, who meets their needs, who supports them, who fits into their life. Notice what's missing from that framing. There's no consideration of mutuality. There's no acknowledgement that relationships require both people to give. There's no discussion of what they're prepared to offer. It's all about what they're looking to receive. And that's exactly what being with them will feel like. It will feel like your role is to meet their needs, while your own needs are secondary or irrelevant. Also, pay attention to whether he describes wanting a partner or wanting a particular type of relationship dynamic. Does he talk about wanting someone to take care of him, to make his life easier, to handle certain responsibilities? Is he looking for a mother figure, a therapist, a personal assistant, a cheerleader? Or is he looking for an equal, a companion, someone to build a life with collaboratively? Because if his description of what he wants sounds like a job description rather than a partnership description, that's exactly what the relationship will be. You'll be working to meet requirements rather than building something together. Furthermore, watch for idealization in how he describes what he wants. If his description of his ideal partner sounds like a fantasy rather than a real person, that's problematic because no real person can live up to an idealized fantasy. And when you inevitably reveal yourself to be human, complex, imperfect, and multidimensional rather than a projection of his ideal, he'll be disappointed. He'll try to shape you back into the fantasy. He'll criticize the ways you deviate from his imagined perfect partner, and you'll never be enough because you're competing with an imagined ideal rather than being accepted as a real person. Conversely, emotionally mature people describe what they're looking for in terms of qualities that reflect realistic expectations and mutual benefit. They talk about wanting someone they respect who respects them. They talk about shared values. They talk about compatible life visions. They talk about qualities like kindness, integrity, humor, or emotional availability. They talk about the kind of relationship they want to build together rather than the services they expect a partner to provide. They acknowledge that relationships are reciprocal, that both people need to feel valued and supported, that both people bring something important to the dynamic. So listen to how he talks about relationships. Listen to whether it sounds like he's looking for a partnership or looking to have his needs met. Listen to whether his expectations are realistic or idealized. Listen to whether there's mutuality in his vision or whether it's entirely focused on what he wants to receive, because what he describes is what he'll expect. And if what he describes sounds like it requires you to be less than fully human, less than fully yourself, less than fully complex, you're getting a preview of how unsatisfying and exhausting this relationship will be. You deserve someone who wants a real person, not a fantasy. You deserve someone who understands that relationships are about mutual benefit, not one-sided service. And you can identify whether he's that person by how he talks about what he's looking for. Now let's discuss an early warning sign that's particularly relevant in the age of technology: how he uses communication, particularly texting and digital contact. Communication patterns reveal a tremendous amount about someone's emotional state, their respect for boundaries, their need for control, and their relationship with you versus their relationship with the idea of you. And you can see problematic patterns very early if you're watching for them. Healthy communication respects your autonomy and your availability. It's responsive but not demanding. It's consistent but not overwhelming. It respects that you have a life outside of conversations with him. It allows space for you to respond when you're available, rather than requiring immediate replies. It enhances connection rather than creating pressure. But problematic communication patterns look very different, and they often emerge early, sometimes within the first few conversations. Watch for these signs. Does he text constantly, creating an expectation that you should always be available and responsive? Does he get upset when you don't reply immediately? Does he send multiple follow-up messages if you don't respond quickly enough for his liking? Does he require constant reassurance or attention? Does he get accusatory or suspicious when you're not immediately available? Does he call repeatedly when you don't answer? Does he use communication as a way to monitor you, asking where you are, what you're doing, who you're with? Does he become cold or punishing when you set boundaries around communication availability? This isn't connection. This is control. It's surveillance. It's an inability to tolerate your independent existence. And it stems from insecurity, anxiety, or controlling tendencies that will only intensify as the relationship progresses. Because right now, you're just dating. You don't owe him constant availability. You don't need to account for your time. You have every right to respond when you're able, rather than dropping everything to maintain constant contact. And if he can't handle that now, what happens if the relationship continues? What happens when you're at work, with friends, engaged in activities that don't involve him? Will you be expected to maintain constant contact, constantly reassuring him, constantly checking in, constantly making him feel prioritized above everything else in your life? That's exhausting, that's unreasonable, and that's a massive red flag. Conversely, also watch for the opposite pattern. Is he inconsistent in communication? Does he text intensely for periods and then disappear without explanation? Does he take days to respond and then act like it's no big deal? Is he available on his terms but not available when you need connection? This kind of inconsistency isn't about being busy. It's about control. It's about training you to accept crumbs of attention. It's about keeping you uncertain and therefore more willing to accept poor treatment because you're grateful when he does show up. Healthy communication patterns are consistent, respectful, and balanced. They allow for the natural rhythms of life where sometimes you're more available and sometimes you're less available. They don't require constant contact but maintain enough connection that both people feel valued. They respect that both people have lives, responsibilities, and other relationships that require attention. They don't use communication as a tool for control, manipulation, or surveillance. And if you're not seeing healthy communication patterns early, if you're seeing demands, pressure, inconsistency, or control, that's not going to improve. That's going to become the communication dynamic of your relationship, and you deserve better than that. You deserve communication that enhances your connection without overwhelming your life. Let's examine another critical early indicator, his relationship with alcohol or substances. This is something many women, particularly women who've been in relationships before, know to watch for because substance issues are relationship killers. They create chaos, instability, unpredictability, and often amplify other problematic behaviors. But the signs aren't always obvious early on. Someone with a developing or established problem often hides it well initially or rationalizes it in ways that make it seem less significant than it is. So what are you watching for? It's not necessarily whether he drinks or uses substances at all. Many people enjoy alcohol responsibly, and it's not inherently problematic. What you're watching for is patterns. Does he seem to need alcohol to relax, to have fun, to deal with stress? Does his personality change significantly when he drinks? Does he drink to excess regularly? Does he become defensive when questioned about his drinking? Does he drive after drinking? Does he pressure you to drink when you don't want to or drink more than you're comfortable with? Does his life seem to revolve around opportunities to drink? Are there consequences to his substance use that he minimizes or denies? Also, watch what happens if you express concern. If you gently bring up that you noticed he seems to drink a lot, or that you're not comfortable with certain behaviors when he's been drinking, how does he respond? Does he get defensive? Does he minimize? Does he make you feel like you're overreacting or being judgmental? Or does he hear your concern, take it seriously, and show through action that your comfort matters more than his drinking? Because the response to concern reveals whether someone has insight into their behavior and cares more about the substance or the relationship. For many women, particularly those who've experienced relationship trauma or who've been in relationships with people who have substance issues, this is a boundary that deserves zero tolerance, because substance issues rarely improve without intervention. They typically worsen, and they create relationship dynamics characterized by lying, unpredictability, broken promises, and sometimes danger. You cannot love someone into sobriety. You cannot fix someone else's relationship with substances. And if you see signs early that someone has a problematic relationship with alcohol or drugs, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away immediately. This isn't your problem to solve. This isn't something you should try to work through. This is someone who needs to address their issue before they're ready for a healthy relationship. And your role is not to wait around hoping they do that work. So pay attention to substance use patterns early. Notice whether drinking or drug use seems central to their life or social activities. Notice whether personality changes significantly under the influence. Notice whether there are consequences they're not acknowledging. And if you see red flags, trust them immediately. This is one area where there's no such thing as overreacting. This is one area where caution serves you well, because substance issues create so much damage in relationships, and they're rarely fixable within the context of the relationship itself. Protect yourself by recognizing the signs early and making clear decisions about what you're willing to accept. Another important early pattern involves how he talks about women in general, not just his exes, which we've discussed, but women as a category. How does he speak about women? Does he talk about women with respect? Does he see women as full, complex human beings? Does he recognize the humanity, agency, and individuality of women? Or are there patterns of disrespect, generalization, or objectification in how he discusses women? Listen for generalizations that reduce women to stereotypes. Listen for language that suggests women are manipulative, irrational, overly emotional, or difficult to understand. Listen for jokes about women that aren't really jokes, but rather expressions of contempt, wrapped in humor. Listen for objectification, where women are discussed primarily in terms of physical attractiveness or sexual availability rather than as whole people. Listen for entitlement, where he talks about what women owe men or what women should do to make men happy. Listen for misogyny dressed up as observation or humor. Because here's the thing, even if he treats you respectfully right now, even if he seems to see you as different from other women, his fundamental attitudes about women will eventually influence how he treats you. You can't truly respect one woman while holding contempt for women as a group. The "you're not like other women" compliment isn't actually a compliment. It's an acknowledgement that he has negative views of women generally and is temporarily exempting you from that category. But that exemption is conditional. It lasts only as long as you're meeting his standards. The moment you disappoint him, the moment you show yourself to be fully human with flaws and complexities, you'll be reclassified as just another woman who exhibits all the qualities he dislikes about the gender. Also, watch how he talks about women in his life, beyond romantic partners. How does he talk about his mother, his sisters, female colleagues or friends, female public figures? Is there basic respect there? Is there recognition of their full humanity? Or is there dismissiveness, contempt, or a pattern of viewing women through a lens of what they provide or fail to provide for him? Because these attitudes don't exist in isolation. Someone who doesn't respect women generally won't truly respect you long-term, even if he's currently treating you well. Conversely, men who actually respect women speak about them as individuals with their own agency, complexity, and humanity. They don't make sweeping generalizations. They don't reduce women to stereotypes. They don't speak with contempt or entitlement. They recognize women as full human beings worthy of the same respect they'd want for themselves. And that baseline respect creates a foundation where you can trust that his care for you isn't an exception to his general misogyny, but rather an expression of genuine respect that extends to all people. So listen carefully to how he talks about women, not just what he says about you, but what he says about women generally, because those attitudes will eventually shape how he sees you, how he treats you, and what he believes you owe him. And if you're hearing disrespect, contempt, or entitlement, understand that you're not actually exempt from those attitudes. You're just temporarily in a category he's treating differently, and that will change. Count on it. Let's discuss another early warning sign that's particularly subtle: his relationship with accountability and apologies. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone occasionally does or says something hurtful, even unintentionally. Everyone sometimes needs to apologize. These moments are actually opportunities to build trust and connection, but only if the person is capable of genuine accountability. And you can see whether someone has this capacity very early, often in small interactions. So when something goes wrong, when he makes a mistake, when he hurts your feelings, even inadvertently, what happens? Can he acknowledge it? Can he offer a genuine apology? Does he take responsibility for his impact even if his intent was benign? Or does he deflect? Does he make excuses? Does he blame you for being too sensitive? Does he claim you misunderstood? Does he apologize in ways that actually shift blame back to you, with apologies like "I'm sorry you feel that way" or "I'm sorry you took it that way"? Does he become defensive, making your hurt feelings into a criticism of him that he needs to protect against? The inability to apologize genuinely is a massive red flag, because relationships require accountability. They require both people to be able to acknowledge when they've caused harm and to make genuine amends. If someone can't do this, if every mistake becomes a defensive position they need to protect rather than an opportunity to repair, you're looking at someone who will never take responsibility for how their behavior impacts you. You're looking at someone who will blame you for your own hurt feelings. You're looking at someone who will make you feel like you're the problem every time they cause a problem. A genuine apology has several components. It acknowledges the specific behavior. It takes responsibility without excuses or justifications. It expresses understanding of impact. It includes an intention to do better, and it follows through with changed behavior. A real apology sounds like "I did this specific thing. I understand it hurt you. I take responsibility for that. I'm going to be more conscious of this going forward." It doesn't include "but." It doesn't deflect blame. It doesn't center the apologizer's feelings. It focuses on accountability and repair. But fake apologies, non-apologies, manipulative apologies look very different. They sound like "I'm sorry you're upset," which blames you for having feelings rather than taking responsibility for causing them. Or "I'm sorry but you," which negates the apology and shifts to criticism of you. Or "I apologize for whatever I did," which refuses to acknowledge the specific behavior. Or "I already apologized, what more do you want?" which treats apology as a transaction rather than genuine accountability. These aren't apologies, these are manipulations designed to make you feel like you've been heard while actually accepting zero responsibility. So create opportunities to see this pattern early. If something bothers you, say so. If he does something hurtful, tell him. These don't need to be big things. They can be small disappointments or minor hurts, but use them as tests to see how he handles accountability. Does he hear you and apologize genuinely? Does he make it right? Does he show through action that your feelings matter? Or does he get defensive, blame you, minimize your feelings, or offer fake apologies that make you feel worse rather than better? Because if he can't handle small accountability early on, he absolutely cannot handle significant accountability later. And relationships require the ability to acknowledge fault, apologize genuinely, and make amends. Without that, you're in a dynamic where you'll be made to feel crazy every time he does something wrong. And that's no way to live. Now let's talk about an early pattern that's particularly important for women who've established their own lives and homes. His respect for your space, physical and otherwise. This shows up in multiple ways early on, and it's worth paying close attention to because it reveals attitudes about boundaries, autonomy, and control that will only intensify if the relationship continues. First, literal physical space. How does he behave in your home or car? Does he respect your environment? Does he ask before moving things or using things? Does he treat your possessions with care? Or does he act entitled to your space? Does he rearrange things without asking? Does he go through your belongings? Does he show up unannounced? Does he push to have a key or access to your home before you're ready for that level of integration? Does he leave his things at your place in ways that feel like marking territory rather than natural integration? These behaviors reveal how he views your autonomy. Respecting your space means respecting that it's yours. It means asking permission before assuming access. It means understanding that your home is your sanctuary and treating it accordingly. It means recognizing that you have systems and preferences that deserve respect. But someone who doesn't respect your space sees your environment as an extension of himself. He sees your belongings as things he's entitled to use. He sees your home as a place he has automatic access to. And this boundary violation in physical space predicts boundary violations in every other area of your life. Beyond physical space, watch how he respects your temporal space. Does he respect your time? Does he show up when he says he will, or does he leave you waiting? Does he honor plans, or does he cancel casually? Does he value your schedule, or does he expect you to drop everything when he wants to see you? Does he understand that your time is valuable and treat it accordingly? Time is a form of respect. How someone treats your time reveals how much they value you. Chronic lateness, casual cancellations, expectation that you'll always accommodate his schedule. These aren't just annoying habits. These are expressions of disrespect. They communicate that his time matters more than yours, that his convenience is more important than your schedule, that you're expected to adjust while he does whatever he wants. Also, watch how he respects your emotional space. Does he give you room to have private thoughts and feelings? Does he respect when you need time to yourself? Or does he require constant access to your emotional state? Does he push you to share before you're ready? Does he make you feel guilty for wanting alone time? Does he need to know every detail of your inner life? Does he respect your right to process things privately before discussing them? Emotional space is as important as physical space. You need room to be yourself, to have your own thoughts and feelings, to process your experiences without constant intrusion. A healthy partner respects that. An unhealthy partner tries to eliminate any part of you that exists independently of the relationship. So pay attention to these patterns early. Notice how he treats your space in all its forms. Notice whether he respects boundaries or pushes against them. Notice whether he sees your autonomy as something to honor or something to erode, because these patterns set the tone for your entire relationship. If he doesn't respect your space, your time, and your emotional autonomy early on, he certainly won't respect them later. And you deserve a partner who honors all the ways you need space, who respects your independence, who understands that healthy relationships allow room for both people to maintain their individuality. Don't settle for someone who sees your boundaries as obstacles to overcome rather than information to respect. Let's examine another early warning sign that's particularly important: his reaction to your past, especially past relationships. When you share information about your life history, about past relationships, about experiences that shaped you, how does he respond? Does he listen with empathy and interest? Does he see your past as part of what makes you who you are? Does he respect that you had a life before him and that your experiences matter? Or does he respond problematically? Watch for signs of retroactive jealousy, where he becomes upset or possessive about relationships that ended before you met. Watch for judgment about your past choices, decisions, or experiences. Watch for attempts to make you feel ashamed of your history. Watch for him using your past as ammunition during conflicts. Watch for him treating your past as something to be overcome or forgotten rather than honored as part of your story. Watch for him comparing himself to past partners in ways that feel competitive rather than curious. Watch for him asking intrusive questions about intimate details that aren't his business. Your past is yours. You don't owe anyone justification for it. You don't need to defend your previous relationships, your choices, or your experiences. A healthy partner understands this. They recognize that your past made you who you are, and since they claim to care about who you are, they respect the journey that got you here. They might be curious about your experiences, but that curiosity comes from a place of wanting to understand you better, not from judgment or possessiveness. But an insecure partner, a controlling partner, or a judgmental partner will use your past against you. They'll make you feel ashamed of previous relationships. They'll act hurt by the fact that you had a life before them. They'll use details you shared in vulnerability as weapons during arguments. They'll make you regret being open about your history, and over time, you'll learn to hide parts of yourself, to edit your story, to present a sanitized version of your past that doesn't trigger their problematic response. And that's no way to live. That's not authentic connection. That's performance to avoid judgment. Particularly for women who've been in previous relationships, who've been married before, who've had significant past partnerships. You need someone who doesn't see your history as threatening or problematic. You need someone who understands that adults come with histories, that those histories are valid, and that past relationships don't diminish your capacity for present and future ones. You need someone secure enough to handle the fact that you existed fully before you met them. And if you're seeing insecurity, judgment, or possessiveness about your past, walk away, because that will only intensify. And you deserve someone who sees your whole story, past included, as valuable rather than threatening. Another critical early pattern involves how he handles success and failure, both his own and yours. This reveals so much about character, emotional maturity, and how sustainable your relationship will be through life's inevitable ups and downs, because life includes both success and failure. Careers have highs and lows, projects succeed or fail, opportunities come through or fall apart. And how someone handles these fluctuations reveals who they really are. Watch how he handles his own failures or setbacks. Does he take them in stride, learn from them, and move forward? Does he acknowledge disappointment without becoming consumed by it? Does he take appropriate responsibility without spiraling into shame or self-hatred? Or does he catastrophize? Does he become someone completely different when things don't go his way? Does he blame others for his failures? Does he give up easily? Does he require extensive emotional labor from you to recover from minor setbacks? Does success or failure define his entire sense of self-worth? Someone whose emotional state is entirely dependent on external success is exhausting to be with, because you become responsible for managing their feelings about outcomes you can't control. You become their emotional regulator every time something doesn't go perfectly. You spend your energy building them back up after every disappointment. And that's not sustainable. That's not partnership. That's parenting. You deserve an adult partner who can handle life's ups and downs with resilience, who can experience disappointment without falling apart, who can maintain baseline emotional stability regardless of external circumstances. Equally important, watch how he handles your successes and failures. We've discussed this in terms of success already, but also pay attention to failure. When something doesn't go well for you, when you face disappointment or setback, how does he respond? Is he supportive? Is he there for you emotionally? Does he help you process without judgment? Does he maintain faith in you even when you're struggling? Or does he use your failures as evidence of inadequacy? Does he lose respect for you when you're not succeeding? Does he become distant or critical? Does he act like your setbacks reflect badly on him? A good partner is there for both success and failure. They celebrate your wins and support you through losses. Their respect for you isn't contingent on your performance. They understand that being human means sometimes failing, sometimes struggling, sometimes having things not work out, and they're capable of providing stable support through all of it. But someone whose regard for you is performance-based, whose respect rises and falls with your successes and failures, is not a safe partner. They're a fair-weather companion who will abandon you emotionally when you most need support. So notice these patterns early. Pay attention to how he handles his own ups and downs. Notice how he responds to yours. See whether he's capable of maintaining emotional stability and mutual support through life's natural fluctuations. Because if he's not, if his emotional state is volatile and dependent on external success, if his respect for you is contingent on your performance, this relationship will not survive real-life challenges. And you deserve someone who's genuinely there through everything, not just the highlight reel. Let's talk about another early indicator that's particularly relevant for women who value their independence and have established their own lives. His attitude toward your autonomy and decision-making. Does he respect that you're a fully capable adult who makes your own decisions? Does he trust your judgment? Does he support your choices even when they're different from what he would choose? Or does he consistently position himself as knowing better, as needing to guide your decisions, as having superior judgment that should override yours? This shows up in multiple ways early on. It might be subtle suggestions about how you should handle situations at work, even though he doesn't have full context and isn't in your field. It might be recommendations about your finances, even though he doesn't know your complete financial picture and hasn't been asked for advice. It might be opinions about your relationships with family or friends, assessing dynamics he doesn't fully understand. It might be suggestions about your health, your appearance, your choices, framed as helpful input, but actually communicating that he doesn't trust your ability to make good decisions for yourself. Pay attention to how this feels. Does his input feel like genuine support that empowers you? Or does it feel like correction that implies you're inadequate without his guidance? The distinction is crucial. Support respects your autonomy while offering assistance. Support says, I trust your judgment, and I'm here if you want to talk through options. But correction undermines your autonomy while claiming to help. Correction says, I know better than you what you should do. For women who've been managing their own lives successfully, who've made good decisions, who've built stable existences, this kind of presumption is particularly insulting. You don't need a parent. You don't need a supervisor. You don't need someone to manage your life. You need a partner, an equal, someone who respects your capabilities and autonomy. And if someone is consistently positioning themselves as your guide rather than your partner, they don't see you as an equal. They see you as someone who needs management. And that's not the foundation for a healthy adult relationship. So watch for this pattern. Notice whether he respects your decisions or consistently suggests alternative approaches. Notice whether he trusts your judgment or implies you need his input to make good choices. Notice whether he sees you as capable or as someone who needs guidance. And if you're seeing the latter, if you're noticing a pattern where he positions himself as more knowledgeable, more capable, better equipped to make decisions, understand that this will only intensify. What starts as unsolicited advice becomes expectations that you defer to his judgment. What starts as helpful suggestions becomes criticism when you don't follow them. And what starts as concern becomes control that erodes your sense of your own capability. You deserve someone who respects your autonomy fully, who trusts your judgment, who sees you as the capable adult you are. Don't settle for someone who needs to feel superior by treating you as less than equal. Now let's discuss an early pattern that's particularly important for your long-term happiness: his capacity for joy, play, and lightness. This might seem less critical than the other warning signs we've discussed, but it's actually fundamental to relationship quality, because relationships should enhance your life, They should bring more joy, more laughter, more lightness into your existence. And if someone is incapable of genuine joy, incapable of playing, incapable of being light and fun, the relationship will feel heavy, serious, and draining. So what are you watching for? Can he laugh genuinely? Can he be silly? Can he play without it needing to be competitive or purposeful? Can he enjoy moments without needing them to be productive? Can he find humor in situations? Can he access childlike joy and wonder? Or is he perpetually serious, perpetually stressed, perpetually focused on problems rather than pleasures? Does everything need to have a point? Does he struggle to relax and simply enjoy? Does he seem uncomfortable with playfulness or view it as immature? Some people are simply more serious by nature, and that's fine. Personality differences are real, but there's a difference between being naturally more serious and being incapable of joy. There's a difference between preferring meaningful activities and being unable to just have fun. And if someone truly can't access joy, can't play, can't be light, spending time with them will feel like work. Everything will feel heavy. Everything will feel serious. And you'll find yourself exhausted by the weight of it all. Moreover, watch whether he can share in your joy. When you're happy, when you're playful, when you're finding humor in something, does he join you there? Does your lightness invite his lightness? Or does he dampen it? Does he become the serious one who can't understand why you're finding something funny? Does he make you feel silly for expressing joy? Does your happiness seem to annoy him rather than elevate him? Because if you can't share joy with someone, if your happiness doesn't create mutual happiness, if playfulness feels one-sided, you're going to become a smaller, more serious, less joyful version of yourself in that relationship. You're going to lose access to your own lightness because it's not being met and reflected back to you. Life is hard enough. Life includes plenty of serious challenges, stressful situations, difficult moments. A good relationship provides relief from that. A good relationship creates space for joy, for laughter, for playfulness. A good relationship makes life feel lighter. But a relationship with someone who can't access joy, who can't play, who makes everything feel heavy and serious, that relationship becomes another source of weight rather than a respite from it. And you deserve someone who enhances the joy in your life rather than diminishing it. You deserve someone you can laugh with, play with, be silly with. You deserve someone whose presence makes your life feel lighter rather than heavier. So don't underestimate the importance of this. Don't dismiss it as superficial. Joy matters, play matters, lightness matters. And if it's not present early on, it won't develop later. Let's examine one final early warning sign that's particularly important. His response to the word no. This is perhaps the single most predictive indicator of whether someone will be safe to be in a relationship with. Because the word no is a complete sentence, it's a boundary, it's an assertion of autonomy. And how someone responds to no tells you everything about whether they respect your right to have boundaries, whether they prioritize your comfort over their desires, and whether they're safe. So test this directly. Say no to something. It doesn't need to be big. Say no to a date request. Say no to a suggestion. Say no to something physical. Say no to something he wants that you're not comfortable with, and watch what happens. Does he accept it immediately and gracefully? Does he respect your no without requiring justification? Does he take no for an answer the first time you say it? Or does he push back? Does he ask why? Does he try to change your mind? Does he make you defend your no? Does he pout, withdraw, or get upset? Does he accept it in the moment but bring it up again later? Does he act like your no is a problem to be solved rather than a boundary to be respected? A man who respects you respects your no immediately, completely, without pushback, without requiring explanation, without making you feel guilty. Because your no isn't about him, it's about you. It's about your boundaries, your comfort, your autonomy, your right to decide what you want and don't want. And someone who truly respects you understands that. They understand that no means no. They understand that your boundaries deserve immediate respect. They understand that you don't owe justification for your limits. They simply accept your no and adjust accordingly. But someone who doesn't respect you treats your no as an opening negotiation. They treat it as something to be overcome. They treat it as a problem that prevents them from getting what they want. And they'll use various tactics to try to change your no to a yes. They'll ask why, forcing you to defend a boundary that needs no defense. They'll suggest you're being unreasonable or too sensitive. They'll point out all the reasons you should say yes. They'll wear you down through persistence. They'll make you feel guilty for having boundaries. They'll act hurt or disappointed, making their feelings your responsibility. They'll accept your no, but punish you emotionally for saying it. They'll bring it up again later, hoping you'll be more amenable. This inability to accept no is not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. Because if someone won't accept no about small things, they absolutely won't accept no about big things. If they push against your boundaries early in dating, they'll push harder once they feel more entitled to access to you. If they make you feel guilty for saying no when you barely know each other, imagine how much worse that will be once you're in a relationship. If they can't respect your autonomy in low-stakes situations, they can't respect it in high-stakes situations. So take this test seriously. Say no. Say it clearly. Say it without extensive justification. Just no. And watch what happens. If he respects it immediately, gracefully, without making it a problem, that's a green flag. That's someone who respects your autonomy. That's someone who prioritizes your comfort over his desires. That's someone who's safe. But if he pushes, questions, manipulates, or punishes, that's a massive red flag. That's someone who doesn't respect boundaries. That's someone who believes his wants should override your limits. That's someone who's not safe, and you need to walk away immediately, because this pattern only escalates, and you deserve someone who hears no and respects it instantly, every single time, without exception. Outro. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about love bombing and intense early attention that feels romantic but is actually manipulation. We've discussed inconsistency between words and actions, how he talks about past relationships, his response to your boundaries, isolation tactics, his relationship with truth, how he treats service workers, his response to your independence and success, his emotional regulation, his approach to compromise, his financial behavior, how he responds to your joy, how he handles disagreement, what he says he's looking for in a relationship, his communication patterns, his relationship with substances, his attitudes about women generally, his capacity for accountability and genuine apology, his respect for your space, his reaction to your past, how he handles success and failure, his respect for your autonomy, his capacity for joy and play, and finally, critically, his response to the word no. That's a lot of warning signs. That's a lot to watch for. And I want to be clear about something. No one is perfect. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has moments where they're not their best selves. The point isn't to find someone who exhibits none of these behaviors ever. The point is to recognize patterns. The point is to see clearly what's happening rather than rationalizing it away. The point is to trust your perceptions rather than dismissing your concerns. The point is to act on red flags early, while it's still easy to walk away, rather than waiting until you're so invested that leaving feels impossible. Because here's what I want you to understand. Every warning sign we've discussed today is something women have encountered before. Every single one has been rationalized away by women who later regretted not trusting their instincts. Every single one has been explained away as not that bad, as something that will get better, as something that can be worked through. But these warning signs don't appear because someone's having a bad day. They appear because they reveal character. They appear because they predict future behavior. They appear because they're showing you who someone actually is beneath the performance of early dating behavior. And you have a choice. You can see these signs and act on them. You can trust yourself. You can prioritize your peace, your safety, your happiness. You can walk away from someone who shows you warning signs, even if they also show you good qualities. Because good qualities don't negate red flags. Charm doesn't cancel out controlling behavior. Intelligence doesn't excuse disrespect. Potential doesn't override concerning patterns. You can require someone to be genuinely healthy, genuinely respectful, genuinely safe before you invest your time, your energy, your emotions, your heart in them. Or you can do what so many women have done before. You can rationalize, you can minimize, you can make excuses, you can focus on the good moments and overlook the warning signs. You can tell yourself you're being too picky, too judgmental, too cautious. You can convince yourself that love means accepting flaws and working through problems. You can stay with someone who shows you multiple red flags early on, hoping they'll change, hoping things will get better, hoping you're wrong about what you're seeing. And you can discover months or years down the road that you weren't wrong. You can discover that those early warning signs were accurate predictors. You can discover that you ignored your instincts to your own detriment. You can discover that leaving became exponentially harder once you were fully invested. You can discover that you lost time, energy, peace, and pieces of yourself to someone who showed you from the beginning that they weren't safe. The choice is yours. But I'm here to tell you that you deserve better. You deserve someone who shows up consistently healthy from the beginning. You deserve someone who respects your boundaries automatically. You deserve someone who takes accountability without defensiveness. You deserve someone who celebrates your success and supports you through failure. You deserve someone who treats you with the same respect they treat everyone else. You deserve someone who accepts your no immediately and gracefully. You deserve someone whose words match their actions. You deserve someone who makes your life lighter rather than heavier. You deserve someone who sees your autonomy as something to honor rather than something to erode. And those people exist. Good partners exist. Healthy relationships exist. But finding them requires being willing to walk away from people who aren't that. It requires trusting your perceptions when you see warning signs. It requires having standards and maintaining them even when someone seems great in other ways. It requires valuing yourself enough to refuse to settle. And I know that's not always easy. I know it can feel like everyone has flaws, so maybe you should just accept these ones. I know it can feel like you're being too picky, like you'll be alone forever if you maintain your standards. I know it can feel like you're giving up on someone who has potential, but I'm here to tell you that your standards aren't too high. They're protecting you. Your instincts aren't wrong. They're trying to keep you safe. Your boundaries aren't unreasonable. They're necessary. And walking away from someone who shows warning signs isn't giving up on love. It's making space for actual love, healthy love, safe love to find you. Because you can't find the right person while you're invested in the wrong one. You can't build a healthy relationship with someone who shows concerning patterns. And you can't protect yourself if you ignore the warnings. So if you're currently seeing someone and recognized multiple patterns we discussed today, I want you to take that seriously. I want you to sit with what you're observing. I want you to trust yourself. I want you to prioritize your well-being over potential. And I want you to consider walking away while it's still relatively easy to do so. Because the further you go with someone who exhibits warning signs, the harder it becomes to leave. The more invested you become, the more you'll rationalize away concerns. The more time you spend, the more you'll feel like you've invested too much to walk away now. Don't fall into that trap. Don't let investment override judgment. Your peace matters more than any relationship. Your safety matters more than someone's potential. Your happiness matters more than being in a relationship. And if you're not currently dating but plan to in the future, I want you to take this information with you. I want you to go into dating with your eyes open. I want you to watch for these warning signs from the very beginning. I want you to trust your perceptions rather than dismissing them. I want you to act on red flags early. And I want you to maintain your standards no matter how good someone seems in other ways. Because you deserve better than someone who shows you warning signs and expects you to overlook them. You deserve someone who shows you green flags from the beginning, and they're out there. But you'll only find them if you're willing to walk away from people who aren't them. Before we end, I want to ask you something. If this video resonated with you, if you recognized patterns you've experienced, if you found value in these insights, please don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button. It helps this content reach more women who need to hear this message. Share this video with your friends, your sisters, your daughters, anyone who might benefit from understanding these warning signs. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. Your story might be exactly what another woman needs to hear to trust her own instincts. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications. Because we're doing important work here. We're creating content that protects women, that empowers women, that gives women the information they need to make healthy choices. Every week we explore the psychology of relationships, the tactics manipulators use, and the strategies you can employ to protect yourself. This isn't just entertainment. This is education that can literally change your life. And if you want to support this channel in going even deeper, creating even more comprehensive content, reaching even more women who need these messages, please consider supporting us with a super thanks. Every bit of support helps us continue this mission of protecting and empowering women through knowledge. It tells us that what we're doing matters, that these messages are important, that you value this work, and we appreciate you more than you know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for investing this time in your own well-being and awareness. Thank you for being someone who cares enough about yourself to learn how to recognize warning signs. You deserve healthy love. You deserve respectful partnership. You deserve someone who makes your life better rather than harder. And I'm here week after week to help you recognize the difference between people who are safe for your heart and people who aren't. Stay aware, stay empowered, trust yourself, and remember, walking away from someone who shows warning signs isn't giving up on love. It's honoring yourself enough to wait for actual love. The kind that doesn't come with red flags. The kind that makes you feel safe, valued, and celebrated from the very beginning. That's what you deserve. Don't settle for less. Until next time, protect your peace, trust your instincts, and never apologize for having standards. You're worth it, every single bit of it.